Hi, and welcome to Visibility Unlimited and Visibility Unlimited Spotlight, the video portion to the podcast, Visibility Unlimited. I'm Leslie Short, your host and the owner of the Cavu Group. I say every time I do a podcast, I'm excited to have this guest on. And I am excited to have my guest, but this is a really important conversation that I don't want anyone to skip over. This is about humanity. This is about business. This is about all of us together. This is about building bridges. But most of all, this is about a conversation that needs to continue to be had as we look at where we are as society and the hate for which is coming in all different directions. But I have someone very special on today that is not only talking the talk, but doing the work. My guest today is Matt Berger. He is the executive director for the Foundation to Combat Antisemitism. Matt, welcome.
Hey, Leslie, thanks for having me.
Of course. Matt, that's a big title. I kind of tried to set it up. To start off light on a very heavy conversation, what are your responsibilities and what is the foundation doing?
Sure. So the foundation is focused on raising awareness and educating specifically people outside the Jewish community about anti-Semitism, what it is, what it looks like today, 2023, and the way that people outside the Jewish community can be partners in the fight against anti-Semitism. The foundation was started in 2019 by Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots and the Kraft Group. It's actually housed inside Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts. And we're really looking at ways that we can raise awareness, educate, and empower people who aren't Jewish to understand that anti-Semitism needs to be part of the conversation that so many of us are having around race, gender equity, and all the other issues that are coming up around justice and equity for all people.
And so with that, and we've had conversations ourselves, and we hear the positive, the negative for this. Well, why does this need to happen? And I think, so we know why this needs to happen, but anyone listening and how it plays a role as part of diversity, equity, inclusion business. What does that look like?
Well, we know from our own research that more than half of Americans don't think that anti-Semitism is a problem today. And those that do think that anti-Semitism is an issue, a majority of them believe that the Jewish community can handle it by themselves. The fact is that Jews make up only 2.4% of the US population, yet Jews are the victims of 55% of religious-based hate crimes in this country. So there's a disparity there, and there's an issue that needs to be raised. And because Jews are only 2.4% of the US population, we really aren't large enough to be able to raise this issue enough on our own. We need the support. We need the allyship of people outside the Jewish community. But unfortunately, a lot of the conversation that's happening around diversity, equity, and inclusion, the Jewish community and the fight against anti-Semitism has not been part of that conversation. So we're really looking to raise awareness and make people understand that it needs to be part of that same conversation. The roots of hate that we talk about when we think about racism, when we think about gender inequality, LGBTQ hate, Asian hate, anti-Semitism comes from the same place. So it needs to be tackled the same way.
Perfect. And I want to get back to that because I know you want to call to action to DEI, but I want to also bring up something that's, as I've been speaking about having you on, and that something that came up, and you and I had a really open conversation, and that's what I want it to be. And I want people that are listening or watching, this is not a sales pitch. This is a real conversation that we're having. And you gave us facts, and that's all great. I want to also understand, or if you can help people understand, because you did make it very clear, this is religious hate. And that's the way you've been wording it. But hate is hate.
Well, I think there's a couple of things here.
Okay.
First, we have to recognize that the Jewish community as it exists in the United States today is much more than a religion. I am Jewish, that's my religion, but that's also my ethnicity. That's also my culture. And many people identify as Jews who are not religious, who don't necessarily believe that they are of the Jewish religion. And so oftentimes, Jews are targeted not because of their religious beliefs, but as a community, as an ethnicity. And so we have to look at the Jewish community outside of that box of religion and need to see the Jewish community as a diverse community of Americans that all share a same heritage, all share a same ethnicity. And when we take the conversation outside of religion, then it can be more part of the same conversation that we have about other biases and other intolerance towards other groups.
That was a great way to explain it. Thank you. So and you have the White House. So it was a lot of celebration 2-3 weeks ago with the White House, Biden-Harris administration going, they've actually created this U.S. strategy to counter anti-Semitism. Are you all working together on that, or what's the breakdown of what that really means, I guess?
Yep. We're one of several organizations that are mentioned specifically in the strategy. We were tasked by the White House to develop a program with the major sports leagues, the NBA, NFL, Major League Soccer, NHL, and Major League Baseball, to develop a program and a convening to bring sports leagues together to talk about anti-Semitism, to talk about hate more broadly, and way that sports can be a tool to combat anti-Semitism and broader types of hate. So we're really looking forward to being part of that conversation with the White House. The importance of the White House strategy was really to elevate the level of discourse around fighting anti-Semitism. More important than the strategy itself was the recognition from the White House that anti-Semitism is an issue that has to be addressed in this country. We're really dealing with an awareness gap right now. It's not so much that people are actively trying to avoid fighting anti-Semitism. Many people do not see that it's a problem that needs to be on their radar. So having the White House come out, having the White House dedicate resources to addressing anti-Semitism sends a real signal that this is an issue that all Americans need to be part of.
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to hear it on all sides, right? Why isn't there more done, period, about hate? All hate groups. I will always be the one that will say there's times we need to have different conversations because it's being viewed differently depending on your culture, how that hate is coming at you. There's a history of hate in different cultures. And so, I hope that we continue to bridge those gaps on having these conversations on, we don't need to, and you and I both said that, we don't need to compare histories of hate, but we do need to recognize that we're in positions that we are feeling hate in different cultures, but how do we bridge it to be a resource for each other and not combat each other?
I think we get caught up too much in trying to compare injustices, trying to determine who needs more resources, who needs more support. And we really are fighting the same battle. And that's part of the conversation that we're trying to have. We have to recognize that we have more in common with one another than we do with the haters, and that the hate is coming from similar places. It may look different. It may come from a different history. It may manifest in different ways, but the roots are so similar and the injustice is so similar that if we work together to address these issues, as opposed to get caught up on which one is more serious or which one needs more resources, I think we're put all of us in a much better position.
I think there's a true education that needs to happen. I think that many people may not even completely understand anti-Semitism. They say hate, but they don't understand all the different ways. And you can see, I was going to say something that was wrong. I was going to say, you can see, not to get caught, because again, that's comparing different ways. Hate is hate, and it comes out differently in different places and times and cultures. But if it's there, then that's an issue. But you all did something Sorry, did you want to say something before I get into
No, I was just going to say that anti-Semitism is a complex term. And part of what makes the problem with anti-Semitism is that people don't know what it means. And am I anti-Semitism? Does that mean I'm pro-Semitism? Does that, it's complicated. Right. And so that's part of the reason that we've really distilled it into Jewish hate. It is hate against Jewish people. And we believe that if you are fighting hate against Asian people, if you're fighting hate against Black people, if you're fighting hate against LGBTQ people, you should be fighting hate against Jewish people as well.
Absolutely. Well, you all did a campaign, and this is kind of almost how our conversation started. And can you share about the campaign for some that may have seen it or not seen it? And for those of you that are listening, we're talking about the blue square, and then we're speaking about the commercial with the neighbor. If you could share a bit about both of those.
Sure. So we launched a campaign called Stand Up to Jewish Hate, launched in March. And with it came an advertising campaign that featured the blue square. And the blue square is an identity. It's a brand, essentially, to raise awareness about anti-Semitism. The first commercial that we aired, the blue square took up 2.4% of TV screens and screens on social media and elsewhere to dramatize essentially that the Jewish community is 2.4% of the US population, but yet are the victims of 55% of religious-based hate crimes. We then went a step further and developed commercials that really depict what anti-Semitism looks like in 2023, what people are experiencing in the Jewish community. Each of the ads were focused, though, on the role of the person outside the Jewish community who saw anti-Semitism and stepped up, who took action when they saw hate in their community. And part of what we wanted to get across was we wanted to educate people about a very specific type of hate that they may not be aware of or they may not recognize as prevalent. But the values that we are reinforcing, that we're instilling in people, are the same values that we would expect people to take if they were seeing any other type of hate. And so we're reminding people, A, that they have a role to play, even if they're not Jewish, in fighting anti-Semitism and fighting hate against Jewish people, and that they already know what to do, because they do it in their lives when they see any other type of injustice. And we're trying to reinforce that message, that anti-Semitism is an issue in which we all have a responsibility to take action.
Okay, love that. I'm going to push back and forth, and we're going to have this conversation.
Of course.
100% I agree, without a doubt. But we're still lacking, which is what you and I are talking about, and we continue to build, to have that bridge of conversation and education together.
Yep.
Because I think what happens sometimes is someone is like, well, stand up for me. Well, no, I didn't see you standing up for me. And then we go back to that old history. Well, so-and-so marched together. And we're in 2023. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you, because we are one prong in a conversation to have a bridge, to say that it is important for us that if you don't know, if you don't understand it, to be able to ask, to be able to say, how do we work together?
So there's a couple of things that I want to point out. First is we were really proud to have more than 200 partner organizations join us in the campaign. And that included, Black groups, Hispanic groups, LGBTQ groups, Asian groups, the AARP, the National Parent Teachers Association, the AFL-CIO, and other unions, a really wide range of groups who all are starting to recognize that anti-Semitism is part of a broader conversation. And that if you're standing up for all these other issues, if you're addressing all these other issues, that anti-Semitism needs to be part of that same conversation. We're not asking to be the top, agenda item. We're asking to be part of the same conversation. The other thing that I'll point out is anti-Semitism is, unfortunately, for generations, for centuries, the gateway hate. That Jews have unfortunately been stereotyped, segregated, and called out in societies around the world. And when anti-Semitism goes unchecked, racism follows, sexism follows, hate against other groups follows. We saw that less than 100 years ago in Germany. And so we have to recognize that fighting anti-Semitism, fighting intolerance against Jews doesn't just help the Jewish community, but it also addresses hate more broadly. And so we're able to address hate against other groups by fighting anti-Semitism.
And I want to make a point because I hear the clatter. Why, Leslie? Why did you do this interview? I want to be very clear. The same way I said Black Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, and everyone went, well, all lives matter. And I would be like, absolutely, all lives matter. But the conversation at this moment is the focus on what we can do with this culture in this community. And I want to make sure for everyone listening and everyone watching, no one is saying just what you said, don't disregard that, come be over here. It's saying, here's some tools. One, to recognize it when you see it. Two, we're looking for champions. We're looking for advocates. I never say allies because that's a lot of pressure on people, right? Because that means you're doing the work all the time. Be aware, have conversations. It's okay to have a conversation just about anti-Semitism. That doesn't take away from me saying, let's have a conversation about African Americans or Latinos or other hate. I need that to be clear because I don't want people to be very confused on this conversation. I want them to understand that we're looking at ways to build bridges, to come together, to have these conversations. Because like you said, if we can combat or understand one piece of hate, then it can help to build for other cultures. That maybe my dream, I don't know, might be in Pollyanna on that. I think that's the reality, right?
Well, I think we also have to recognize the diversity of the Jewish community today, that, Jews of color are 10% of the Jewish population today, that there is a growing diversity within the Jewish community. And so when we put one group ahead of the other or make the case for one over the other, we're neglecting the lived experiences of those that fit into multiple categories, that have more diverse experiences than stereotypes or beliefs of who a community is allow for. And so we have to recognize that we need to address these issues in all shapes and sizes because they are more complex than just boxes on a census.
And that comes back again to the education. That comes back to when you said before in our conversation, you alluded to it earlier, when we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops and conversations, when we are speaking about culture, right, and we are speaking about hate, that needs to be part of the conversation. And as we're listing, here's what gender, race, religion, LGBTQ plus, all these things, disabilities, we need to make sure that we say their hate is coming in different forms and this is what it's looking like.
And one of the complexities of anti-Semitism and fighting anti-Semitism is that by and large, the DEI industry that has developed over the last 10 years or so is not equipped and not aware of anti-Semitism, not equipped to handle and not aware of anti-Semitism. And so often the very infrastructure that's put in place, whether on college campuses or in corporate America or elsewhere, that is designed to address those that are being targeted or those that are being treated unjustly are not set up to support the Jewish community or address anti-Semitism. And so when Jews go to address anti-Semitism or to raise complaints and the infrastructure isn't there to support them, they're victimized again. And there's a growing isolation for Jews in a lot of these spaces because on the one hand, they are being victimized and treated unjustly. And on the other hand, they're not getting the resources or not getting the support that they need from those that are designed to help that. And so a lot of the work that's being done by our organization, by other organizations in this space is to educate the DEI community, to raise awareness about anti-Semitism in these spaces so that when we're having conversations about all these other issues, anti-Semitism is part of that conversation.
Well, let's just be honest. We're going to call it out there. These were conversations that were never happening in workspaces. So now you have people that are not equipped. It is the same, when we speak about the Crown Act or AAP, is all the things that we're speaking about culture. We never spoke about cultural beings in the workplace. We spoke about work culture, but not the people that actually make up the culture.
Right.
And so you have people in place that, as you said, I received calls to come in and do anti-Semitism trainings and workshops. And I don't like to say trainings because we don't train human beings. We have conversations with human beings. And I said no, because even though I work with a lot of Jewish organizations, I did not want to do more harm than good. And you have to know when you, as the facilitator, can do more harm than good.
And that's exactly right. And there has been a environment, both within the Jewish community and broader, that has not recognized Jews as being different, as being subjected to harassment or intolerance, and anti-Semitism as being an issue that needs to be addressed. Part of that is the fault of the Jewish community that has not, for generations, really raised those issues at a level for fear that it would impact the goal that many Jews had of assimilation, of being seen as part of the American dream. And because the Jewish community is not seen visually and in many ways is stereotyped as not needing support, it is not incorporated and has not been incorporated into the DEI structure. And so what we're seeing now is a lot of corporations, a lot of organizations scrambling to understand what anti-Semitism is, understand who the Jews are in their community, and also recognizing that it doesn't necessarily fit into the clean lines and buckets, because it's not just a religion, as we spoke about earlier. So we don't just talk about it in that context. It's not just an ethnicity. It's not a race. There are a multitude of identities that Jews hold. And so that adds a complexity that doesn't allow it to sort of follow the traditional format that the DEI infrastructure has created to deal with different groups.
Well, that's the problem with the DEI. as I say that, it's not only for the Jewish community, it was built on boxes. And there's not one culture that comes in and fits in that box. Not one. And therefore, until we take all blinders off and remove all those boxes and say, there's complexities within all of this, and how do we address maybe not all the complexities, but how do we address complexities that we see sitting right there? And then we start building down. But that means in order to do that, you have to be able to say, I need the right partners.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I know why I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because I want to keep this conversation going. I want to be able to speak with my other DEI colleagues. I want to, I bring it up because I've had opportunities to, because it's a segment of work that I'm in that is, I'm going to break things down, but everyone may not have the opportunities to have that. So what can they look at from the foundation? What are the tools, some other tools that they may be able to take away from the foundation?
Sure. So we would encourage everybody to go to standuptojewishhate.org to learn more about what anti-Semitism is, to watch our videos, to use those videos as educational tools. And there's other educational tools on the website that can provide a lot of resources. We want people to show up. We want people to use the blue square as a way of showing allyship. And we know that allyship doesn't solve problems, but it means something. When you are working in a corporate environment and you're, on LinkedIn and you're seeing people with blue squares, that says something to you. That the same way when you see a rainbow flag in someone's profile, you see you have an ally. You see you have a potential point of entry in conversation. And that can be really important. So we're encouraging people to post and share the blue square on their social media to show that they care about this issue and to raise awareness about it. And we're also, asking for corporations and organizations to start having these conversations about what does addressing anti-Semitism and addressing the Jewish community look like. We believe a lot of the organizations and the communities are not consciously choosing to ignore anti-Semitism, not consciously choosing to isolate the Jewish community. They're just not set up to address it. And so we really want to start having those conversations. And there are many organizations that are really trying to dive into these conversations within the Jewish community to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion in all its forms incorporates the Jewish community and incorporates the fight against anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to say, continue to educate yourself. You're scared to put a blue square? Go read a book. That's what I used to say to people. Go say hello. Go ask questions. I like to break it down very simple because sometimes we ask people to do too much that we think is not enough. I'm going to say educate yourself. Take the time to have conversations and not assume you know who someone is or you think you know who they are because of a badge that they may wear or a community for which they live in. I always say, I don't want to be judged by the color of my skin or how I walk or where I live. I'm going to say, I'm going to vote the same, that we take the time to see each other and meet each other and educate each other, because this is the only way we're going to understand each other, to be able to really stand. Because what we want is not allies that are tired, because, people got fatigued. Black Lives Matter, but folks got tired quick. We need people to stand with us to continue to build bridges on how we build cultural awareness, how we combat anti-Semitism, how we have it as part of our conversations, how we have a hate conversation that's a full conversation.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really important is language. Language is essential. When we address terms and tropes and things that are used in everyday life, we stop anti-Semitism or hatred or intolerance at its core. When we don't allow the small injustices to go unquestioned, we prevent people from believing it's okay and then escalating from there. Because if we allow people to believe that any group should be targeted by words, that's how misconceptions, that's how stereotypes, that's how hatred is formed. And then in the wrong hands, it can escalate quickly and dangerously. So we really need to address anti-Semitism. There's no such thing as benign anti-Semitism. There's no such thing as benign racism or homophobia. We have to address it at its core, because if we say, oh, that's not a big deal, or it's too small to address, it escalates and it grows and it becomes much harder to address.
Oh, you know what? And I'm gonna leave it at that spot. Will you please give the website again?
Sure. It's standuptojewishhate.org. The campaign is the Stand Up to Jewish Hate campaign, and we encourage everybody to use the blue square emoji that's on their phone already, and to post it and share it on their social media feed, and to really show both the Jewish community and people outside the Jewish community that they care about this issue.
Matt, thank you so much for taking the time, for coming to educate, for doing what you're doing. I look forward to continue to hopefully working with you and just sharing education as we go along through this.
Absolutely. Really appreciate the opportunity. It's so important that we're having these types of conversations together and not talking to our own communities. The more that we branch out, learn about who each other is, and talk to one another, the more we're going to be able to address these issues together.
Absolutely agreed. Thanks again. And thank you to everyone that's been listening or watching. You know how to find me at the Cavu Group. The YouTube channel is the Cavu Group, and so is all the social media. We look forward to continuing to bring you unique and necessary conversation to do what? Keep expanding beyond your current culture. Thank you.